They're not like good weather VCs, but basically the people remaining, they kind of can deal with the bumps, and they know that it's not always going up all the time. That's not only sunshine all the time. The good thing about our business is, I mean, in 10, 15 investments, you only have to get it right 1 or 2 times. Yeah, so that's a pretty low bottom line that you kind of need to reach over. The general theme of great teams want to use their unique insight and technology to really solve big problems has not gone away, and neither have the big problems. Sometimes you think, okay, things just don't go, but eventually things are sorted out in one way or another.
Do you still believe that the return is still parallel to the risk in early stage venture capital industry right now?
Is AI going to be a game for giants only?
I'm so happy to have you here with us, Peter, on our Y Venture Capital podcast. And Peter, you are the GP of one of the biggest Series A fund in German-speaking countries, especially in Vienna, in Austria. So, Peter, I'm quite curious about your journey to founding 3VC along the way, though we had a few talks before. But before, I was asking you as a potential candidate, but not as an interviewer. I'm also curious about your upbringing and what shaped you to be a venture capitalist eventually. Have you thought about doing some venture when you were a child?
Yeah, actually, I came from the venture, not from the capital side. So basically, I learned very early on what it is to kind of work on your own. So my father was kind of self-employed, and so I really picked it up that you have your own destiny and you kind of start working. So basically, as a child, I started to kind of teach myself coding. I got into the bookstores and got these kind of coding books because there was no resources on the internet. And then I figured out that people would pay me for writing websites for them. So that was kind of how I earned my first money. And that was pretty exciting because actually I also earned money in the school because my teacher, basically, he realized that he couldn't code. Yeah. And it was like HTML. So basically he said, like, Peter, you have some cash, you make the class, you teach your classmates about how to code and what to do. Yeah. And it was really fascinating. So I was not only earning my money, I was starting as a teacher with maybe being 14 years old or 15. Let me see, that was 1995, around that, maybe earlier even.
Before we were actually even born.
Yeah. So basically, I figured out I don't have to kind of go for a company for have an internship, but actually I could earn much more if I did some coding in the summer. So I did a couple of these projects, and in the end, yeah, I started studying, and I created my first company, which was in automating certain HR processes. WeCore is called. I mean, I sold the brand, so today it's something completely different. But back then it was helping big corporates in automating certain HR processes and getting some insights on how well employees are doing and how they like trainings and how they can increase the efficiency, etc. But basically, I realized I was lacking certain skills, and that was a churned consultancy, and I onboarded Accenture. I could keep my business on the side. That's what they allowed me. That was the main reason why I didn't join McKinsey, but Accenture back then, so they were more generous in sidekicks, so to say. And then I thought I want to do that 1 or 2 years, and I ended up doing it 6 years in the end. And then now 11 years ago, I was kind of a turning point. I did also my PhD in during that time to really go deep. And I said, okay, I don't want to do consulting anymore. And so I had the opportunity to either join a friend, start another company, or there was a new fund created in Austria. And I decided for the latter because it sounded really interesting. And I got in touch with that kind of business during my exchange here in Canada. Before, I had no clue what venture capital was about, honestly. So it was like kind of, hey, you actually can finance startups. That makes a lot of sense. You don't need to bootstrap everything. Okay, so you can kind of jumpstart certain things and grow faster. And it basically fascinated me, and I could apply my skills that I learned at Accenture for like transaction and M&A, which was the main topics I was in. So the transactional know-how and analyzing business cases and doing tech DDs to basically the venture. And that's where I kind of started learning again. And then after 4 years, founded 3VC together with Roman and Eva. And now it's 7 years in, second fund, team of now 12 people, 4 partners. And yes, we are supporting a lot of like amazing companies, and some have really outgrown like all of our expectations. Exactly. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
So had you known the world of venture capital. So would you still be doing that PhD and Accenture journey?
No, it was basically in Canada. So there was basically interviewing. I was doing such an MBA exchange program, and there were different firms coming to the class and basically presenting their companies, etc., from NASA and all the consultancies and investment banks, and also some venture capital firms. And that's why I said, okay, that's really interesting because you need that technical background. You're working really on the edge of kind of bringing innovation and technology to kind of a broader audience. You have a very big lever by the capital you basically deploy. So that was what I found really interesting because I never really wanted to go into like investment banking. That was too kind of, I would say, too much structure, to not real enough in a sense of view. But that kind of being very close, working with entrepreneurs, etc., that kind of had a very interesting edge to me. And when I dig deeper, and I read also a couple of books around that topic, I really realized, hey, that's actually what I really like to do. And yeah, nobody ever told me that this job existed. So back then there was no job. When I started, there was like Oliver with SpeedInvest basically creating the first fund on the side. So there was not really people you could go to and ask. And also I failed with all the interviews. I interviewed with a couple of, I think, London-based funds, but they all said, sorry, you don't have any experience. You will not be a fit. You're going to definitely fail. So, I mean, that also teaches you, if you have a dream, don't give up. And eventually, I think you're going to find what you like and where you can kind of thrive.
Sure.
So how was the European VC market when you entered? And over the years, which important issues have been resolved and what new ones have been emerged?
That's a very big question. So when I started, basically, it was pretty non-existing. Especially in the DACH region. So there were always some good funds in the UK, of course. There was activity, of course, in the US, which has this big history. But in Austria, it was like a private equity. So like working with established firms, but in a very, I would say, manner of taking majorities and basically optimizing cash flows, etc., but not really venture as we know it. There were a couple of angel, maybe starting 3-4 years earlier. Like Hansi Hansmann is one of the most well-known here in Europe and Austria. So he had a couple of really big investments, and he basically spearheaded a lot of the funds in existing today, like Speed Invest, etc., by his input and also by providing money. So basically back then there was the three guys from Speed Invest and nobody else, which was the reason that the Austrian state actually said, hey, we give a pool of money and we seek people to manage it. And that's basically how I got the first fund. It was a big Austrian banking group and the state providing some capital to actually spear that, because there was nothing. And that has changed rapidly. So over the last like 11 years, it has really ripened. There's now, I would say, there's 6-7 seed funds in Austria alone. There's maybe, I don't know, 50-60 in the DACH region. There's some pretty established good players like an Earlierst and Wolfspring, etc. And there's a lot of international funds that have come to London and that are also investing here in the region. So I would say the field has professionalized a lot. There's much more capital available, which is an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. So it's good for founders to have more than one source of capital. As an investor, it's much harder to get deals and get kind of valuation. And I remember the times, what kind of crazy deals and valuations I could get. Like when I started off, that was kind of ridiculous. Yeah. So that was really very small investment that were paid out in tranches. A lot of stuff that is not very usual and common, and also not best practice, honestly. So basically, when we started then 3VC, our own fund, we really applied the kind of US principles of plain vanilla, supportive, very simple, focusing on a few couple terms, not over engineering, but really being helpful, thinking along the lines, and not your round and optimize your position, but really thinking about what can optimize the company going forward and ultimately kind of becoming a public company. And that kind of changes your thinking completely. And that has kind of diffused a little bit in the market. Also, I would say with the niche banks, so there have been 2 crises in between, like the financial crisis, and now that kind of crisis, it started with COVID and then prolonged with the Ukrainian war, with basically markets drying out. So, I mean, I think with these crises, also the VCs have professionalized and kind of, they're not like good weather VCs, but basically the people remaining, they kind of can deal with the bumps, and they know that it's not always going up all the time. That's not only sunshine all the time, but there might be times where kind of you have to struggle, and you have to struggle as a company, and you struggle also as a venture capitalist, of course.
So it brings us to another question is that, so Peter, you back then you started investing seed, and then now you're focusing on Series A and onward. So last week I also had a chat with multiple capitals Delta. We invest in micro VCs. So his argument is that so nowadays micro VCs might be more return wise more favorable, like compared to the Series A funds investing solely Series A companies, which might be already big and expensive. And I wonder, like, what's your thesis, but like only investing Series A companies so firmly? Because like you're really competing with London VCs or global VCs when they started already grown to be like the Series A stages.
Yeah, that's true, but I think everybody needs to pick their strategy, and for us, it also plays into what we think is our kind of first principles. Yeah, and our first principle is really quality over quantity in all aspects. Yeah, that starts with the team, that starts with our investors, and that doesn't end with the companies we select to work with. Yeah, so by having a smaller portfolio, larger ticket sizes, that allows us to spend a much more time in thinking with each of these companies. To your point on the different strategies, I think there is viability in everyone if executed right. So like for the micro VCs, you might have a super huge deviation in outcomes. Yeah. There are definitely certain people with exceptional networks and kind of natural talent that will outperform every VC, of course. But also I think you have limits in micro VC, which is often single GPs. I think for certain things to really be effective, you need to be a team. And again, here, the scale of the team is really important. So the really large shops, there is a lot of inwards thinking, ongoing organizational, political topics that you have to cover. So the size we have, like a dozen, 12 people, I think that's kind of the most efficient, where still have flat hierarchies, can make good decisions, and with a team that is very diverse and all former entrepreneurs back. Yeah. So I'm not afraid of competing. For me, it's important two things. So if you have a broad strategy, so big fund, a lot of investments, etc., you need to make sure that you are in every relevant company. Yeah, so basically indexing. So Index is doing it. The name is already propagating that. Tomico's a large funds here active in they're doing it. And then there's other funds that are more, okay, we don't do everything, but what we do that should really work out. And you can maybe put a Bessemer, a Sequoia, and others, Blossom Capital in London, Ophelia, and also us into the bucket. And both is working if the assumption are working. So if we would find out that we are not able to get into 3-4 good companies per year, our strategy would not work. Yeah. Or if we lose to kind of the founders and we really want to work with, it wouldn't work. But for now, I have to say, we have plenty of opportunity. Actually, we can't work with all the companies we would like to work with. So, and also, of course, we limited our fund size to, it's like a 150 million fund. Maybe it can go up to 200, 250. But in that strategy, we could never deploy a 500 million euros. So, of course, with this strategy, you set boundaries. And the thing is, you can only work effective in that boundaries. If you go outside, you need to change the strategy, or I think you will have a disadvantage on returns and things won't work out. Yeah, or you will just deviate to the median. So I think that's the careful thing. But again, I mean, we kind of constantly think around that. It doesn't mean that we will do the same for the next fund. We're definitely sharpen on certain things, and we have taken some learnings from the first fund into the second one that I think really pay off. Like the more focus, not doing seed, helps us tremendously by not competing with the seed funds and angel groups we work with. Yeah. Previously they said, hey, you're competing with us, we're not giving you the good deals. Yeah. Now they say, no, you're not competing us, you give us our fair share in the seed. We're very happy to invite you to the Series A. And that's something where multi-stage funds sometimes have problems, because on the one hand, they are reliant on the deal flow from earlier stage investors. On the other hand, they are competing on that deals. And that doesn't really fit together in the end.
Yeah, as far as I can tell from your track record on investing like 10 to 20 companies and already yielding like a handful unicorns, like I guess your strategy works right now, at least for
It's
now.
too early to say. I
Yeah,
think
so
you can always say after the fact and after you have returned the money. Yeah, but it looks good on I would say the TVPI and the companies that have been created. Yeah, I agree. But as said, I mean, it's the work of the founders and it's always a little on timing and market. So there's so many things you actually can't control. So I would never take that kind of on us to say, okay, we just picked right. I think that would be wrong. Yeah. Maybe the companies picked us right as investor, and we are just kind of piggybacking by basically having founders that selected us as their investors. Yeah.
So speaking of USP, and I see that you're one of the most data-driven VC in Europe, according to the data-driven VC Substack. Which part of your workflow benefits the most from the data? And maybe now plus AI?
Yeah, the thing is, we have been using AI or machine learning quite some time, like 5 years already. It's because I'm an IT guy by background. I just love to have a proper data infrastructure and also to be able to follow through things. Yeah, because if you don't kind of conserve stuff, you're never able to learn and then back later figure out why you did certain things and what you can improve. So it's basically we were digital and paperless from the very beginning. Yeah, and using coding tools for structuring our processes, saving our data, coming to our conclusions, and then also validating these. Yeah, we're using data in a lot of different steps from, I would say, discovery of deals, like finding out the white spots that are not covered by our network. And that's kind of where also the AI, as I say, is used to kind of figure out signals from public internet data, scrape data, etc., and kind of point us to certain things that we otherwise would oversee, yeah, or that would use just immense resources to do it manually, yeah. And then, of course, I would say applying certain things like we automate certain parts of the evaluations by tools, external providers. We get data insights on competition, etc. So in the work, it of course helps a lot. And then we're also experimenting with the large language models in, I don't know, categorization, helping you prepare for board meetings, a lot of things that you can do here as well. Yeah, I'm not a fan of totally automating. So I'm a fan of helping and making my workflow more robust and efficient, and also ensuring that like the team is on the same page and can kind of back you up and that you can learn as a group. Yeah, and not so much in having the, I would say, fully automated VC. I think that's a super large step. I think it's even more complicated and hard than a self-driving car. And still, at least in Austria or in Europe, we don't have them yet. Maybe you're much more advanced here in China, but at least here in Europe, it's not really there. The same is true here. And that put aside is allowing us focus on what is most important, and then it's still a people business. So I think the real impact you make by working with the founders in the board, by having these conversations, by bringing together the right people in a virtual or real room and having the kind of conversations and group thinking that can really make a difference. And if you have more time for doing that, I think that's great. Or if you have better data to make decisions on, that's great. And I think the same is true for VC.
Yeah, but is there any contradictions between the data analysis and intuition? And which one wins out?
Wow. I think in our phase, still intuition rules over data. Yeah, because we still have companies where you have very little history or maybe not significant statistical data that you might not go into the fallacy that basically you just believe the data and you think this data, which is always kind of a picture of the past, is basically giving you any insights on the future. I mean, you need always to be careful what kind of data it is, what you can do with it, and also what the limitations are. So I think in our due diligence process, doing these ref calls with the team, with employees, with former employees, with customers, is super, super important. And some of it is KPI and fact and data driven, but a lot of it is, I would say, intuition driven, because you really want to find out how that is working, the fabric of this founding team, if they're able to kind of deliver what they promise, if they can execute, if they are synergetic towards each other or not, if they're really driven by the mission or they have other kind of motives in their mind. And I think at least that for now, there's no machine that can kind of replace that. And then in the end, I said, it's you need to work together with these people. So if you don't spend time and you get a good feeling that this is working, and you're not fed up with each other after a year, then it's good, because I mean, in the end, you need to kind of face it that you will work together like for 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years. Hopefully on both sides you have some intuition at play, because that will increase the likelihood of that playing out nice.
So does it mean like, so you only work with or invest in people who you like?
I mean, you should always work only with people you like, yeah? So I think that's a good side effect, because I hope if somebody doesn't like me, he hopefully won't take my money. So I think it goes in both directions. Yeah, but that's true. What I enjoy at my work is that I can work with people in my team and with investors and with founders where I enjoy working with people that are really driven by what they do. Yeah. And that really want to move the needle. Yeah. So that's kind of what gives a lot of energy, if you kind of work with people that kind of really want to push the boundaries. Yeah.
What if your favorite founder is working in a market you don't believe in, like the index missed out Spotify?
Yeah, I think that will happen, because, of course, we need to come a conclusion that this is a journey we want to embark in. And so the kind of, I would say, end picture is extremely important. So basically what we do is kind of, we figure out, okay, what are potential scenarios in the future, in the good and in the bad. Yeah. And if you don't find that kind of scenario that you really kind of embrace and see there is a big company or a big market created, it's super hard to embark on such a journey if you don't share the vision. Yeah. So for sure, we have missed founders that are great, and where we just thought the market is too small or there is no market. And we also might have it wrong the other way around. We thought there is a big market, and turns out it's not a market, or it's getting super competitive or eaten up by an incumbent. But agree, you should also say no just because you like somebody is not enough to kind of build a big business that is needed and important.
So speaking of people, so as we know, like European founders, they're most likely to be geek, and like Index Ventures, Danny Reimer said, so maybe Europeans are more pragmatic and Americans are more boastful. And then like also you as a VC also have to underestimate or overestimate like the founders' words in their pitch. So have you ever sensed any like subtle feelings on how the founders have pitched to you?
So there are huge differences depending also on the culture. So like even Austrians to Germans, but even so, if you go like to Central Eastern Europe, like Czech or Romanian founders, they behave and present and sell their ideas in a completely different way. Are often even more kind of taken back and not kind of overselling. Whereas if you have like mainly, I think, US educated people, they are very selly. They're more vision driven, and maybe they kind of oversell too. Yeah, but I think it's a fine line of being able to sell what you do and kind of not being able to get the message around. Yeah, and sometimes I have the feeling there is unfortunately founders that have a very hard time to get the message around, even though they're working on great products and solving great needs. But if you can't convince your customers why this is great and why they need it, it's super hard. And it's also then hard to kind of communicate that to employees. And it's even harder than to communicate that to investors. So I think it's a chicken egg problem. So if you can't sell, you have difficult times in attracting the right talent. You have difficult times in fundraising, and you have a more difficult time in selling to customers, which then makes your business not grow so fast. And if you are good at that, you can outperform even with a worse product. And that's what we have seen in the past in US companies or I would say very execution-driven founders outperforming technically superior founders, but just by being able to execute better, by sell better, by fundraise faster, by being more aggressive. So I think you need both skill sets.
Exactly. So, Peter, also in your journey as a venture capitalist, so what belief of yours has ever changed before that you believed so heavily, but now like you thought it wasn't that relevant anymore?
If the product is great enough, everything else will come and fall into place. Yeah. So, I mean, I learned very early on that that's not the case, of course. Yeah. So if you have the greatest product and nobody knows about it, you're not making the revenue. Yeah. So I think that's definitely something I learned early on. And then I think what I learned over the years is that kind of team and people are much even more important than I thought they are, especially when it comes to difficult situational crisis. I've seen them really teams that are just above the top outperform by all means. And I'm not saying by 20% better, but being by 20 times better. Yeah. So really by magnitudes. And that's weird because you think, okay, everything is kind of smaller, the difficulty differences are not so big, but turns out that when it really comes down to kind of very critical things, actually better teams really make a dent and a difference, especially in difficult times. And that's something which I realized in hard times where companies didn't make it and companies where I thought they could not make it because all odds were against them. They came out fine, and the only differential factor in the end was really that managing teams and their ability to kind of drive through that situation, bring their employees along, kind of work with their customers, and really kind of make it work with a lot of personal invest and a lot of kind of mission drivenness.
Yeah, sure. So, Peter, have you also like passed on some companies that became really big later?
Yeah, of course. I won't name it. I think it's too early to build up an anti-portfolio. So I leave that to the more established brands for now.
Sure.
But of course, we have these companies where we just had wrong perceptions, and our due diligence couldn't kind of wrap our head around. So also, we thought, okay, that round is too expensive, we won't invest. And then later it turned out maybe we should have done it because in the end it was still a small difference and the upside was immense still. Yeah, I mean that always happens and it's fine. Yeah, we don't get it right all the time. I think we get it wrong most of the times. But the good thing about our business is, I mean, in 10, 15 investments, you only have to get it right 1 or 2 times. Yeah. So that's a pretty low, pretty low bottom line that you kind of need to reach over. Yeah.
Sure. So speaking of milestones, so as a manager of 3VC, so what future milestones do you want to achieve, like maybe in 5 years?
I want the 3VC is really the go-to address for founders in Europe that want to build big businesses, and that are look for money and support, and as an accumulator for the business, that they kind of think of us first. If we can achieve that, I mean, that's all what I want. First signs look promising, but yeah, let's check in again in 5 years and see where we are. Yeah.
Sure. So now let's dive into a bit deep into like the AI topics. So in AI era, so Peter, so what do you think will be the most important fit? So it's the X market fit, right? So previously it was always like product market fit. Also, you mentioned product is always like the most important, as well as like the team is also important. Sometimes, especially in early stage investing, people might be the most important. So what's that X that also matters in the AI era that makes the X market fit works?
I think it's a very difficult question because there's a multitude of things that need to work for creating value in AI. I think it's a tight alignment, I would say, of infrastructure, hardware, GPUs, of algorithms, where we have certain limitations with the current transformer models. And then I would say the data layer and use case process embedding layer that needs to work out. And only if all these kind of 3 or 4 layers are tightly aligned, you will see value created. And I think for now, there's a lot of investments going on in all these topics, but I think the output is far from where it has to be. Yeah, I think there was an exercise from Sequoia. There needs to be, I don't know, 500 billion in actually revenue generated to just cover the costs, basically. Yeah, I think the number is even higher. I came to 1 trillion. If I just kind of take the predictions of 5 years, like GPU and what it kind of takes to run and build the data centers out of it, on achieving decent gross margins there. So I think that's going to be crucial. It does mean that you need to kind of figure out that you're competitive on all these layers and in the complete stack. Yeah. And of course, the hardware layer is very much dominated by NVIDIA for now. Yeah. I would say infrastructure layer is very much dominated by the hyperscalers, and in US, Europe, that's mainly like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, and maybe a little bit Alibaba in your region, and also a little bit present here. And then you can differentiate as a startup, I would say, in algorithms. There's some really interesting stuff going on in not only transformer models, but like advanced forms of long-term, short-term memory, an Austrian company, and especially what I see a lot in data. So like quality data really makes a difference for these models. So you can have even 10 times smaller models outperforming when they're trained with the right data. And I've seen that at work in, I would say, medical applications for like analyzing MRT scans, etc., where you have already above human performance. And that's sometimes overseen when you work with ChatGPT, etc. I mean, that's very nice, but it's not creating these kind of superhuman efficiency or capability per se. But I mean, we're going to see more and more of these use cases. So in the end, it's still the market fit, I would say. So where does this help in creating a lot of value in either saving work or enabling work that has not been able to do before?
Exactly.
So would you invest in a company like Perplexity? And as you said, it seems to be a game of who has the most GPUs, the wins. And do you think is AI going to be a game for giants only?
No, we wouldn't, to answer your first question, but we would in other like models that are more on the efficiency side, and looking at a couple of things in that area. So basically that allows to reach the same results with like 10 or 50 times less compute, less watts, so to say. But in the end, it comes down to energy. So calculations per energy. It's a material investment game to some extent, very true. But I think the fascinating thing is to think about always with establishment of new infrastructures, a lot of innovation has come. So when you look, it was the routers and the digital networks that enabled the internet, and then came web and all the kind of things that enabled a lot of new business models and created a lot of value. And these big companies we all know about. And then you had like mobile phones and like distributed wireless data networks that enabled all the apps and mobile phones and all the kind of mobile communications and things that we see. I think now with the AI, it's less on the AI. What is really changing is now you have a lot of compute available, both on device and in data centers. And that's interesting because you never before in the history of mankind, you had such high level of compute power available, so distributed in high density before. So maybe like a ChatGPT and large language model is the right thing to use it, but maybe there's completely different use cases that will create a lot of value. But the great thing is now you have that infrastructure in place, and I'm really excited to see what's coming out of that in the next 5 to 10 years, because that's usually how long it takes until you see these results. So from like TCP IP, internet nets, it kind of, I don't know, Amazon and others to establish, it was a 10 years journey. Same with mobile phones. So I think in 10 years, we're going to see what the impact of super performant GPUs on the edge and on data center, what will enable that for us as humans and kind of also for organizations.
Another crucial issue that do you have some different perspectives on the localization of software for global market? And like take the PicsArt as an example, and I should say I love it and I use it since 2017. And actually, it didn't tailor much for the Chinese users and opting for a subscription model rather than the ads, which are more familiar to us. And it's also like the beauty enhancing features that are popular in Chinese apps like 美图秀秀. But it was still warmly welcomed in China from the very beginning and even without any marketing cost. So as the Chinese SaaS entrepreneurs are expanding globally, the issue is being more crucial. And maybe the example of PicsArt shows that the addressing the questions of to what extent and in what aspect should localization be done, and how to balance the localization with internationalization is particularly important.
I think it's super important. It's totally underestimated. And you gave a good example. Unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers being built up, and that goes in all directions. So it's harder for companies addressing Chinese market, and it's harder for Chinese companies to addressing Europe and American markets. So that's a very unfortunate political development, and let's see where that leads. But taking that aside, I think localization is really a way of, I always say this, bringing down this Babylonian craze and making it undone again. So with software and interfaces, we actually have a mean of kind of providing the right interfaces, whatever our cultural and language background is, and our kind of how we work with it. And actually, that's one of the big benefits I see in AI is AI and these chat interfaces for now, they are actually a new kind of human-machine interface. That is able to adapt extremely well to whoever you are. So you can talk with a ChatGPT in whatever language and whatever style, and it will basically adapt to that style. You can theoretically generate UI UXs on the fly, and depending what your preferences are. So there's a lot of potential in that. Also, I want to say, we are biased because we invest in a company that's called Lokalise. And basically what they do is help companies with the process of localizing the software products. And they do that for a reason, because they figured out, customers are much more willing to use a product that is in your language, that is kind of to your needs, to how you are used to interact with software products. So it's not only about the language. It's much more. It's about how certain things are done. So it's not translation alone. It's really localization. And I think that makes a big difference. And I have to say, here in Europe, we have an advantage in that, because in a very small area, actually, we have a lot of different languages and cultures. So that makes the need much more important, because otherwise you can only address a couple of millions of users. And if you want to address 100 million potential users, you have to internationalize, because there's not a single language group with 100 million users here in Europe. Unless you go English, then you can do US and UK, and you have like 350 million addressable market of end consumers. So I think it's super important. It's super underestimated. If you do it right, you will see the results. But of course, it adds a super high complexity to your product, because you need to maintain it, and Localize or other solutions can help in that. And what's interesting also, large language models, they have brought down the cost of actually the translation piece a lot, basically to zero, because before the prohibitive factor was really paying translator to do the translations, and that was really expensive, and you had to redo it when you did a new software update. Now these costs have really come down basically to zero. But machine translation is so good that in most cases it will fit the case, and that basically just enables you to kind of offer your solution actually in many different languages from the very beginning, whereas before that was kind of a very expensive endeavor that you had to kind of invest into.
So Peter, I actually had a peek at your t-shirt. Is that a unicorn on that?
Yeah. It's so hard to build one. So that's the origami kind of thing. On the origami, it's really hard to make. And they say like building a unicorn company is even harder. So we're still kind of embarking on that journey.
Okay, great. And so, Peter, I'm also quite curious about particularly your own AI investing thesis. So what kind of AI companies are you focusing there at 3DC? And what interesting AI companies are you talking to recently?
Yeah, we have invested like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago already. We've already exited the first AI companies. So we invested very early on in DeepCode, which was a company automatically analyzing software code and bug fixing that was acquired by Besnik. So I would say we figured out very early on that data and algorithm and nothing else is machine learning and AI can create some super interesting advantages. We're investing in another company, Isaiah, that helps automate and detect incidences at airports and helps automate the apron handling. And they're now live in a lot of US, European airports already, and basically helping avoid mistakes and making the processes faster. And they do a lot of like image analysis, event detection, and in the core, it's machine learning already. Yeah. What does it mean for our thesis? I mean, three things. As I said, you can look at the infrastructure layer, and I would say the algorithm layer, the data layer, and an application layer. And we currently looking at application layer, so solutions that are very sticky and provide a very good, like giving, like for instance, small companies superpowers in how they can automate certain processes. So companies that would not have IT departments and usually not being able to apply and program stuff on ourselves. But now with these things available, you can create products that actually give superpowers that only big corporations used to have to kind of very small, like even individuals companies. So that's kind of a space we look at.
Yeah, just like a point. So like recently I just saw a news, like first round capital just investing in a no code AI startup, which helps with the workflow building processes for B2B SaaS companies. The pace of development in this field is developing right now.
No, it's crazy. And I mean, of course, I think it's a little bit overestimated. So there will be a lot of things that fail and don't work out, but also there will be things that really work out very well. So I've seen, like, for instance, something that is really working well is all these customer support automation. Yeah. So not talking to agents, but really talking actually to virtual agents that are actually super well trained. They give you the right answers, and if they can't know answers, then they connect you to a person. And for a consumer, it's great. I mean, you don't have to wait an hour in the waiting line till you get to a support agent. You are most often immediately helped with, and I mean that's just things that kind of prove powerful and actually are super simple. I mean, the question here is that defensible? Because I think maybe not so much, but at least it's creating some benefit immediate. And then we are looking at things that are kind of securing these models, because of course with these kind of new architecture and black box models, you buy a lot of issues in efficiency, performance, and security, and there will be solutions needed to kind of monitor, tackle, and secure that. Yeah. And I think another thing is, I would say still on the more foundational algorithm layer, looking at innovations that allow the kind of results we see with transformer models in more efficient ways, like Mamba, for instance, in the US, XLSTM from Sepp Hochreiter in Austria. So different approaches on the algorithmic model to kind of create these like statistic large models and how they work and what kind of things they can, because not every solution is the right one for every problem. I think there is needs to be much more differentiation on what kind of problem you have and what's the right kind of set of algorithms you want to apply to these.
Yeah. So right now let's rethink the future of venture capital industry. So Peter, as a venture capitalist based in Austria, so do you still believe that the return is still parallel to the risk in early stage venture capital industry right now?
Yeah,
so
for
say
sure. Otherwise they wouldn't do that job.
I'm a wealthy, I'm a Chinese rich bastard LP with like 500 million euro to deploy. So of course, like I'm from a traditional business industry. Is it still worthwhile for me to invest in a European manager who could invest in promising European companies?
Of course, I say yes, because I have my own money in the fund, and I wouldn't do the job if I don't believe that there is a super high lever. Why that? I mean, as long as you think that by technological and software innovation you can unlock exponential value, that equation won't go away. And I see no reason why this should change, especially now with the advances on GPUs and LLMs and all the other things that we are seeing, I mean, it's actually the most exciting times because there's so many new opportunities unlocked that I would say we have not had in the past. Of course, the world is not as open and not as, I would say, easygoing as it used to be. So there's a lot of issues that are kind of not helpful, I would say. Yeah. But I mean, the general theme of great teams want to use their unique insight and technology to really solve big problems has not gone away. And neither have the big problems. So there's so many really, really huge problems that we need to solve on, like climate change, distribution of resources, energy, with like driving, transport, mobility, etc. So there's a lot of really tough, challenging problem. A lot of them not solved, and a lot of the tools not that there to kind of solve them. So I think it's always a great time to kind of be an entrepreneur and do it. And that means it's always a good time to be a VC that kind of funds and supports these kind of innovations.
Yeah, there's still good teams in Europe and good managers as well.
Hopefully.
So, are there any positive signals in ventures at such a difficult time?
Yeah, they are. So we still see a lot of companies doing really well and in performing. We have funds raised. Yeah, just recently StoryBlok did their Series C round. They got a lot of attention. So if you're a good company and you're growing, you can still get funding and you can expand your business. And I think that's a very good and promising sign. I think what's a little bit depressing is these public markets have not opened up really for these tech companies yet. So, I mean, that needs to happen sooner or later. Otherwise, the whole chain gets kind of disrupted because you need to get liquidity at some point. You can't just wait 20 years until these companies are so big that they generate so much cash flow that you can basically live off the cash flow. But in venture, you have to kind of sell your assets at some point. And when you don't have these public markets, it's super hard to sell them to public investors, but it's also then harder for these later stage funds to buy your stakes because they again don't know how they can sell that, and that's kind of a vicious cycle that is still not broken through. Let's hope that this changes. We'll see. Yeah.
So let's go to the last part. Some silly questions that we ask everyone. And what is the most important question you are currently pursuing?
Wow, let me think.
How to make 3VC great.
No, it's really about thinking how the limitations of our business model, how they can be unfolded to be more supportive to the founders. And then that's a very tough and ongoing challenge because, of course, you're bound to many regulatory and by the constraints. And so thinking about how you can undo these constraints in being more efficient, that definitely takes up some of my time. And then there's a lot of operational things on just getting stuff done and transactions done, etc. So a lot of like transactional work. But on the strategic level, I think that's what it is. It's really thinking about the constraints and how you can unlock them, because that usually creates a lot of interesting opportunities.
Exactly. So what is the meaning of life, Peter?
Is, I would say, to make a difference for this and the next generations, and hopefully having a place that is more livable and better, so also for kind of my kids and their kids. So I think that's the purpose that we have, is really to make this place a better place for all of us. And as a VC, hopefully I can help some of the tools and the companies that have a part of that to grow them and make them successful. So that's my personal goal. That's not silly questions, I have to say. That's really intellectual, challenging questions. I could talk about them very long. It's actually really hard to give a good answer to these questions. So which is an indication that the question is really great.
Thank you.
And I knew that you could give some good answers. So what kind of advice would you give to the younger self, the younger version of Peter, who was just upon graduating from university?
Yeah, not to be discouraged. There's always things that change. So kind of being even more resilient, because sometimes you think, okay, things just don't go, but eventually things are sorted out in one way or another. So be a little bit more patient, trust your friends, your skills, your networks. I think that would be the advice I would give my younger me. But it's also a theoretical question because we will never be in that.
Mhm.
Oh, thankfully,
Sure.
not in that possibility to do so.
Yeah, yeah. And I also read a quote from your website. You said, "I'm a true believer in the fact that failure doesn't mean defeat. Rather, it's an opportunity to learn something new." Okay,
Yes.
quote Peter from 3VC. What kind of failure of yours in the past have really made you like struggled and you also learned the most from it?
Wow, there's a lot of failures I did on both a professional and a private level. It's like not devoting enough time on, I don't know, friends because you kind of were crazy on working, etc. So just getting out of balance, which you realize later that that's maybe a trade-off that was not super good. On the business side, on my startup, which never outgrow, is really kind of taking in other people that can complement me early on. Yeah. And really kind of seeing what you're not good at and then complementing early enough and kind of knowing that there is people that are just much better and you can't do everything yourself. And I mean, sometimes you just have to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, hopefully we could also learn from you in person because we're actually planning on a further road trip from China to Europe.
Good.
Mhm.
Was a pleasure. Really,
you.
really great format, great questions. So I hope you have a lot
Thanks a
of
lot, Peter.
further interesting interviews and have a good time and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.